Hello, I'm Paola Poletto, Director of Engagement and Learning at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and I'm so happy to be joined by Kim Smith. Hi, Kim. Kim has an amazing book, a really fun book, Boxitects, and we're going to talk about it. We're going to actually read through it. Kim's going to take us through this beautiful book about creativity. Before I do, I want to acknowledge that the Art Gallery of Ontario is in Toronto, and we are speaking on land that is the territory of the Anishinaabe Mississauga Nation and is also the territory of the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant is an agreement between the land, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Toronto is also governed by a treaty between the federal government of Canada and the Mississauga of the New Credit Anishinaabe Nation. Toronto has always been a territory and treaty center for First Nations. I also want to acknowledge that Kim is speaking from Calgary, and please join me in caring for our lands and people now and into the future. Kim, when I read your book and looked at your book for the first time, and I thought about the AGO's collection, the work that came immediately to mind was Donald Judd's Untitled iconic sculpture. Perhaps you have an image of it that you could share. And while you do, hi everyone out there. Let us know where you're zooming in from. Please do use the question and answer option below your screen. And if there are questions for either Kim or I, we'd be happy to answer them. So this is the piece I was thinking about. And it's so different in many ways from Boxitects and what the characters do with boxes, but it has boxes. And this is a very ordered set of boxes, if you will. We were talking just before coming on screen, Kim, that Donald Judd really wanted them to all be the same size, precisely the same, and with the same distance between them. And you'll see this kind of work in many museums across North America. What does it remind you of?
For me, it kind of reminds me of, sorry, I have a frog in my throat this morning. So it kind of reminds me of a factory where you're seeing all these individual boxes come off the factory line. You can almost kind of imagine them on a conveyor belt.
Yeah.
Because of how evenly spaced they are.
And the other, it also reminds me of this sort of weird ladder. Like you could climb it, although we wouldn't want one to climb this work. But in other times, I think of the boxes I see. I live in an apartment building where lots of deliveries are happening, and there's lots of boxes, and they're not so ordered like the Donald Judd we see here, but there is a bit of order to that chaos of delivery. So it really kind of evokes some ideas for me about order and disorder and what that creativity is in between, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Even the material down to that kind of shiny, silvery kind of aluminum material.
Yeah. So the boxes, though, that your character Meg works with are the everyday boxes. Mm-hmm. I'm going to hand it over to you to talk about Boxitects and take us through that wonderful story.
All right. So we're going to be reading Boxitects this morning. So let's start. So Boxitects. Meg was a boxitect. She loved to make things out of boxes. She loved making tiny houses, tall towers, and twisty tunnels. And she made marvelous things no one had ever seen before. Meg was proud of her work. She could make boxes into anything. Meg's mother was proud too. She thought Meg was brilliant and creative. So Meg's mother sent Meg to maker school, where she could be even more brilliant and creative. At maker school, there were blanketeers, spaghetti-techs, tin foilers, and egg cartoneers. There was almost any kind of maker you could imagine. But Meg was the class's first boxitect, and that made her feel special. At school, Meg learned all about boxitecture. She learned how to make her structures useful, strong, and beautiful. Meg loved everything about maker school until Simone showed up. Like Meg, Simone was new. She was also brilliant and creative. Worst of all, Simone was a boxitect too. And she was already making things Meg had never dreamed of. In class, Simone would point out ways Meg could make her constructions a little straighter, more wind resistant, and less boring. So Meg told Simone she should build things that were less bumpy, sturdier, and much prettier. On the last day of school, the class's annual maker match was held to see who can make the most amazing thing. But there was just one rule: you had to work as a team. But Meg didn't want to work with anyone, and neither did Simone. The blanketeers built with blankets and pillows. The spaghetti-techs built with pasta and glue. The bakeologists built with cake and frosting. But the boxitects were not building at all. They were arguing. "I want to make a tree house," Meg said. "No, I want to make a ship," Simone insisted. Meg drew a line down the middle of a very large box. "I'll take this half. You can have the other." "Fine," said Simone. Soon Meg noticed that her treehouse wasn't as large as Simone's ship, so she made her side taller and more impressive. When Simone noticed that Meg's treehouse was taller than her ship, she made her side higher and more extraordinary. Slowly, Meg and Simone's creation grew bigger and bigger. They both built and built until there wasn't a single box left. And at last, they finished. "What is it?" asked a classmate. "I've never seen anything like it," said another. The teacher said, "It looks like it might." "Achoo," said a very small fly. Crash! "Your side was too wobbly," shouted Meg. "Your side was too heavy," cried Simone. "Oh dear," said the judge. The maker match was not over yet, but most of Meg and Simone's work was ruined. There were only a few parts left that could be saved. "If we combine my treehouse with your ship," Meg started, "we might be able to make one thing," finished Simone. The Boxitects decided to call a truce so they could finish the match. Working as a team, Meg and Simone quickly joined the remaining pieces together until they had created something new. At the end of the maker match, the Boxitects hadn't won first place, but they had a different way of making brilliant and creative things, working together. And they each gained a new friend. "What should we make next?" asked Meg. "How about a buoyant bungalow?" suggested Simone. "Or a motorcycle mansion," said Meg. The end. So I hope you guys all enjoyed Boxitects.
It was so good. And you know what I really like about it, I thought about even my own relationships at work and in my family and how we create together. And sometimes we compete, and sometimes we actually find ways to really work together and make bigger things. Are there any things that you made with boxes yourself, Kim?
Yeah, so I've made quite a few things with boxes. So growing up, I actually moved around a lot. So we always had a ton of big cardboard boxes around as a kid. So what I would make are these long tunnels. I join all the boxes together so they're all in a row. And then I put the biggest one at the end. and then I'd make it into a little fort at the end. And also another thing that I made out of boxes that was always really fun, in school, we had to make these dioramas for French class, and we had to make a schoolroom. But I decided I wanted to make the whole school instead of just the classroom. So I built it all out of boxes. It was so big. My mom had to drive me to school, and we both had to carry it up to the classroom. But it was a lot of fun.
Wow. And did you use color? Like how did you decorate your sculpture?
I use like markers and pencils and like, I guess anything that I had around the house. So a lot of times we'd get like, just like, I guess just things, and there'd be like little plastic things that would come with it that were usually just garbage. We'd just throw them out, but my mom would hold on to all of them. So I used all these kind of like recycled pieces to like decorate the classrooms and like create little desks and things out of them.
Did that memory inspire the story?
Yeah, so that was kind of the idea behind Boxitects, just kind of my own creative endeavors growing up. And actually that project in French class, just taking something kind of to the extreme was kind of the idea that I put into the book, where the characters just kept building and building and building as as big as they could get.
Yeah. I wanted to ask out there, and we have people from Ottawa and Toronto, some wonderful schools, Allenby Junior Public School, Herb Campbell Public School in Caledon. What are some of the projects you might have already created out of boxes, or is there something you could imagine that you could create? What would it be?
I love the idea of imagining something new. Honestly, you can almost take anything and make it out of boxes. You just kind of have to have a plan first. I'm trying to think, one of my favorite things that I wanted to put in the book but never quite made it into it was a cardboard submarine. Originally, Meg and Simone were building this cardboard submarine that I thought would be really cute.
If you actually put it in water, do you think it would float?
It might float for a little bit. Actually, there's these really neat cardboard competitions where you take duct tape and cardboard and you build boats out of them. That was another thing that I was inspired by when making the Boxitects book. But you just tape the underneath. If you want to make a cardboard boat, you tape underneath with the duct tape, and then it helps it float a little bit longer.
Oh, that's a smart idea. I'm seeing lots of ideas coming in from our audience. Some would want to make a huge rocket ship, a boat, a Valentine, thinking about next week perhaps. And there's someone who asked, why did you choose boxes?
I just love building with boxes. I thought it was something that everybody kind of had on hand. Everybody could relate to taking a box and probably turning it into something. So I thought it was something that everybody could kind of relate to.
Well, and they're readily available for the most part, all different sizes. That's the nice part too. So they're kind of like blocks, but of different sizes.
Mm-hmm.
We have someone named Furman who says they're 6 years old and they loved your book. I built an amazing castle and I'm collecting different things of different materials to continue building amazing things.
Ooh, that's awesome. I'm so happy to hear it.
So many great ideas. Oh, I'm thinking if I'd like to invite people to actually take a photo of some of their creations and send it to hashtag AGO Makes. We have an online galleries on the Learn From Home page, and it would be really great to see some of your creations, possibly even inspired by Boxitects. Wouldn't that be great? Boxitects is also available through the AGO store for those of you who haven't had a chance to pick one up yet. And I'm seeing that people want to create dinosaurs. This is like, it can be anything. We can create a whole new world.
Mm-hmm.
How many books have you written, Kim?
Only one. I've only written one book. I'm usually the illustrator of picture books. So the books that I've illustrated, I've done over, I think, 30 picture books at the moment.
Wow. So what is the difference between illustrating a book and writing a book?
The writing is when you create the words that go in the book and kind of the general story. And then the illustrator is the person who draws the pictures in the book.
Does one take longer than the other? I'm given that for Boxitects, you did both those things.
Yeah, so sometimes I think one or the other might take shorter depending on your own process. But for me, when I was writing Boxitects, actually, I think the illustrations and the writing of the picture book took about the same length of time. For me, I find writing really challenging. It's something I'm a little bit new at because, like I said before, I usually draw the pictures in the picture book. So Boxitects, I was new at it, so it took a little bit of practice.
So you, as an illustrator, you have a very, I would imagine, a very unique look to your work. Do you find that the various books that you've created, do you see a similarity in the characters or in the colors you choose, or what inspires you?
So many things inspire me. I can never pinpoint it on one kind of thing because just like living life and seeing different things out there, I always am inspired by maybe like a new pattern of colors and or I don't know, different ways to draw. There is similarities. I think for every artist, it's kind of like having a different personality. So through your drawings, you kind of express your personality through the way that you draw. So that's why everybody kind of draws a little bit differently, I think.
Yeah, it's nice though to think that way. Everyone can draw, and they'll always have a very unique way of drawing. I know you're going to share some drawing tips with us. Is that something you would like to do now?
Yeah, we can start the drawing. So people at home, you want to get your pencils and markers or whatever you feel like drawing with today out, and a few pieces of paper because we're going to be drawing both characters today. Now I'm going to be drawing on my computer. So you'll just see my blank white screen. Let's see. Okay, so the first character that we're going to be drawing this morning is Meg. So in the middle of your paper, I'm just going to walk you through step by step of how I draw Meg, and then we'll draw Simone as well. So in the middle of your paper, we're going to start with a circle. For Meg's head. And in the middle of that circle, I'm going to draw 2 more circles. And those are Meg's eyes.
Kim, someone named Ryan wants to know who your favorite character is. Is it Meg or is it someone else?
Actually, I think my favorite character in the book is actually the teacher. I know he doesn't make a huge appearance. You can see him kind of in the background, but I had a real fun time designing his shirts and just thinking of him as a character. He's actually my favorite. The next thing we're going to draw is Meg's nose. So it's kind of a C shape in the middle of her head. And then we're going to put a dot for her nostril. In the middle of her eyes, we're going to do 2 more circles and fill them in for her pupils. And then the next thing we're going to draw is her smile. So we're going to do a C shape and then another C shape below it. And then we're going to fill that in. And then the next thing we're going to draw is her ear. So it's a C shape on the side.
So I'm just going to mention that for those of you who might be having trouble seeing the drawing and the illustration that Kim's doing, that is on the main screen, and Kim should be in a smaller screen. If you're on a mobile device, you may have to switch. We'll find out if we can help with anything. And in the meantime, we also have someone asking Kim why you've chosen Photoshop, or do you also use Illustrator to create your designs?
I just use Photoshop. That's kind of what I learned when I went to art school. I haven't, sometimes when I'm using, sometimes I use my iPad actually to do a lot of my sketches. So I use another program called Procreate to do some of my drawings in there. Usually it's just kind of the rough drawings. So if I'm drawing a picture book, the little rough sketches that I make at the very, very beginning, I'll draw with my iPad. But yeah, for all my finished artwork, I use Photoshop.
I see rectangles.
Yeah, so to draw her vest, we just draw a few rectangles down. Oh, right. Actually, I was gonna draw her. I'm just gonna erase a little bit at the bottom here. And then we're gonna just draw some rectangles because Meg, for our drawing, we're gonna have her kind of popping out of a box. So we're gonna continue down, drawing the rectangle at the bottom to complete the box. So the next thing I'm gonna draw are her arms, and she's gonna be kind of springing out of the box like, hey. So it's just 2 lines on the side of her body. And you might notice that I sometimes go in and erase things and kind of fix them up after. So as an artist, I'm always changing and kind of revising my drawings, because often the first time I draw something, it's not completely perfect. I'm always trying to make things a little bit better. So the other side of her arm is just 2 lines. And then there's a little box at the end for her sleeve. And then 2 more lines. And then we'll draw her thumb and 4 fingers. So now we're gonna give Meg some hair. So she has kind of a curly ponytail that's held back so it doesn't get in her way when she's creating. And you wanna use kind of a little squiggly line, kind of like that, to make the curls. And you just kind of avoid all the things that we've already drawn, because it's kind of behind her hand and her face. And then for her ponytail, it's just 2 really skinny triangles. And are kind of just in back of her head.
Is that the bow, Kim?
Yeah, that's her little bow. So if you've seen the Boxitects picture book, and if you remember the illustrations that we saw before, it's just a little red hair tie in the back.
Carrie says, wow, you draw perfectly. There is a question about how you would print then your final work, your final image.
So when I finish all the illustrations in Photoshop, what happens is I send all that digital artwork, send it to the publisher, and they send it off to the printer who's actually going to print the books. And what happens before any books are made is that they send all the pages back on the paper it's going to be printed on. So we get to see kind of a version of it printed before it even goes. So we can make sure all the colors look nice and all the text is correct and everything looks good before it's actually made into a picture book. So it's all printed.
Wow. So it's quite a process. You watch, you first create from home, then it goes to the design and printing of the book, and then you will look at it before it actually gets printed in many copies to make sure everything looks good. One other question that came up, and you know, we can certainly see Meg popping out of this box, and we know that the top of the box can open, flip open. It has a fold so that it can open easily. But how, if you're creating something like a dinosaur, how would you create moving parts like the arms or tails using a variety of boxes? What would you do, Kim?
So let me just pull it up. So if I was thinking about making a dinosaur out of boxes, first I would kind of like I'd probably draw the dinosaur. So here, just let me quickly, maybe we'll just do the dinosaur head. My dinosaur is a little bit cartoony. And then if we have his little arms, I'm gonna do a T-Rex. But so if you kind of think about kind of the basic shapes, you can kind of think about how you might approach it in making it out of boxes. So if we had his head, if we made his head out of one box, we might think about it like that. And maybe you could cut out where his mouth is. Maybe he's got some teeth. It's not always going to look the same. Maybe there's another box for where his neck is. And then maybe for his arm, maybe it's just a piece of box that's kind of cut out on
like
the side.
A flat piece of box?
Yeah, a flat piece of box. So you might be able to use maybe like, oh, I forget what they're called. The little, they look like this. They're little brass, they're brass tacks, but they're brass.
Oh yes, butterfly clips. Someone just, yes. Rebecca. Thank you,
So,
Rebecca.
To attach the arm, you might use something like that, so you can move the arm up and down. Like you might tape together this part of the dinosaur. See, this is why drawing something out helps. So you can kind of plan ahead for your dinosaur. Maybe on the top, you just have maybe another flat piece of box for the eyes. My dinosaur looks pretty goofy, but you can maybe tape or glue that piece. But if you draw it out flat, or if you're even looking at like a photograph of something, you can draw it out and try and figure out how those boxes might translate into something that's real.
That's so helpful. I have a question from Rachel. What was your first book that you illustrated?
The first picture book that I illustrated, I actually can't pronounce the name. Hold on, I'm actually going to show it. It's on my bookshelf. So this is the first picture book that I illustrated. I have never figured out how to pronounce it properly. It's an Inuit word, and this is it's an Inuit fable kind of story, but I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
And what was it like? How was it like to start with a book and in a fable perhaps that was new to you, and what were your big learnings from doing that project?
I learned so much. Luckily, the publisher that I worked with, Inhabit Media, they specialize in kind of these Inuit storytelling. So I was able to kind of like ask any questions back and forth, and obviously working with the authors, who I believe are both Inuit. Yeah, so any questions I had, I could talk with them, or if they thought that things, if I needed to illustrate a certain way, they would always let me know.
And how many years ago was that?
That one was, I believe it was in 2012. I'm just checking. It always says what year for the picture book.
So you've been illustrating books for at least 9 years, maybe even 10. And would you say your style has changed over time?
Yeah, my style has definitely changed. So if you look kind of here, I'm going to hold both books up. So if you look at something like these illustrations, and then you look at something like Boxitects, they're quite different.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of the kind of way that I've evolved my art, is just kind of when I'm inspired by different things, I'll often kind of incorporate that in. So maybe my style is a little bit more simple now when it was more realistic back then.
Oh, I see. So, so were you drawing from like real scenes or places you knew of, and now you're more kind of out there, would you say?
Kind of. So I guess I just drew more from, I guess, real life, or like I would look at something and I would draw it. Now I'm more comfortable with maybe like seeing a tree and maybe simplifying it a little bit. So instead of just drawing a tree with tons of branches, or especially for coniferous trees, I would just draw them maybe as a triangle, or find different ways to kind of simplify them in my drawings.
You have so many fans, Kim. The chat and the questions are just coming in, and so many people love your books and illustrations. For those who are thinking about maybe creating their own books, because we can start at any age,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what would you recommend? What would be the first thing to do, and what would your advice be?
I would say just start writing and drawing. Just get a stack of paper and just sit down and start creating. There's not one real pathway to making stories. I mean, you can sit down today and write a whole book. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of just sitting down and getting started.
We have a request if you would consider drawing one more thing with us.
Yes, for sure.
And, you know, here's the real talk. Do you ever get frustrated by your work, or by maybe the relationships with other authors? How do you deal with that? I'm thinking back about the sort of the key story of Boxitects. Like, what happens when you have disagreements?
So I think when you have disagreements, or if you find something that's not turning out, like often for me, when I'm drawing my picture books, I'll often be like, oh no, this drawing isn't good enough. It's not quite where I want it to be. So when I get frustrated, usually I'll step back from it and give myself a little bit of distance. So I might give myself a few hours, or maybe a day or two, and then I'll come back, hopefully with kind of fresh eyes, and be able to sit back down and hopefully find a way to kind of work through it. Or sometimes I just need to practice a little bit more. So I have a real difficult time drawing cars. And if I have to draw a scene with a lot of cars, I can get very frustrated. So what I'll do is I'll sit down, if I step back from the project, I sit down with like a big stack of paper and like pictures of cars in front of me, and then I'll practice drawing those cars.
Oh, that's really good advice. Yeah.
Thanks. And then if I have trouble with if people that I'm working with, if we're having trouble communicating, usually it's just a matter of sharing my feelings with them, and then sitting down and chatting with them and working through those as well.
Yeah. So what might we be able to draw together?
So I'm going to share my screen again. Oops, I think I shared the wrong one. Is that?
Yeah, see, I'm seeing a blank screen.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so what we can do is we're gonna draw Simone. I'm gonna draw Simone, and then if you guys have some suggestions of something that she can be, like we're gonna kind of make a Boxitect kind of drawing. So if you guys have things that we can combine together to make kind of a Boxitect structure for Simone,
I'm sure.
Keep adding to it, and we'll kind of see where it goes.
That sounds like fun. Someone asked how often you draw. Do you draw every day, Kim, or what does your schedule look like?
I'm pretty much drawing every day. Sometimes on the weekends, I need to take a break from it, just to get out there and you know, do things and see things. I really love to hike, so I do take breaks. But yeah, I do I've been doing a lot of painting in the evenings to try and do something a little bit different, because I said most of my work's digital, so I've been actually getting like I've been getting these gouache paints and watercolor out and doing some painting at night, just to you know, mix things up, stay creative.
Yeah. Someone suggests a sandcastle.
Sandcastle. All right. I'll just draw Simone.
It seems to me when you're drawing that I see many shapes. I see circles, half circles, rectangles, squares. It's really nice to think about that, how these various shapes can then form even a character.
Mm-hmm. So usually drawing, sometimes if you see the drawing finished, it always looks like complicated. But if you break it down by simple shapes, I'm always constructing things with kind of simpler shapes. It's actually a little bit easier. It's a trick that we're taught in art school to look at something. If we think it's really complicated, there's always a way to break it down with just your simple basic shapes like circles, triangles, and squares, and also like cubes and spheres and cylinders. All right, so I'm gonna have Simone, kind of like Meg. She's gonna be on top of our sand castles. And I'm trying to think, I'm gonna start with kind of a basic castle shape.
Oh, now I'm seeing it. Before I was like, those look like boxes.
So I'm going to draw over Simone's head a little bit. I'm just going to erase part of that.
And I'm going to invite people who are drawing along to share your drawings with us at AGO Makes, hashtag AGO Makes. And so we can have a look as well. It will go on our online gallery from the AGO Make From Home page. Love to see your creations.
Just looks like a regular castle, but to make it a sand castle, maybe Simone has drawn some little dots over it to make it kind of look sandy. Maybe she's painted it. One of the things that I always add to my sand castles are seashells. So maybe Simone has cut out some starfish shapes. Maybe a little shell here. Does anybody have some other suggestions of things that we can add?
Let's see. Someone's asking if you draw anime.
Anime. I actually don't anymore, but when I was growing up, when I was in high school, I used to draw it all the time. That was my favorite thing to draw. I watched a lot of, I think Sailor Moon was my favorite #1 show. When I was in grade 4, and me and my best friend, we used to get together and draw it constantly. Actually, I guess so that was younger, elementary school as well.
So what is the difference between, let's say, drawing anime and drawing in the illustrative style that you're showing here?
I think the only difference is style. So anime has a certain look to it, a certain style. It's very like flat, almost like dark lines. Like I almost want to say like comic bookish, but not really. I guess it has its own thing, obviously, because it has its own title. But more of the children's book is kind of taking away those like hard lines and then drawing them more like shapes, I think. If that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we have a few things now to add to this scene: a bucket and shovel, a crab, The shore, maybe. A motorcycle on the sand. Maybe even a bridge. Someone even mentioned a car. I think they're trying to get you to draw a car for us, even though that's the one that makes you frustrated.
I do like the motorcycle. I'm wondering if I should try and combine. So when Meg and Simone, the whole idea of Meg and Simone building things was to combine kind of that, kind of like a house or something you live in and something you travel on, or like a vehicle together. So I'm going to attempt to make this a sand castle motorcycle. I just have to remember.
Oh, I want one.
What motorcycles look like. So often when I'm drawing too, I like to keep pictures of some of the things that I'm drawing, because sometimes I can't remember what things look like. So like I said, when I draw cars, maybe this is going to be really like Vespas. So it might look a little bit more like a Vespa, because that's the only thing close to a motorcycle I can think of right now.
Yeah. That looks really great. And some of the other things people are saying are a flag on the castle, maybe a flower, a unicorn.
These are some great suggestions. We'll do some flags. Actually, I'm going to erase that one. Maybe we'll be in motion and the flags will be going the other way.
Oh, right. So there's movement.
I'm forgetting, what were some of the other suggestions again?
A flower, a unicorn, a shore, a crab, a buck. Oh, you did the bucket and shovel. Wow, you're fast, Kim. A helmet. Someone's asking if you're using a mouse when you're drawing. What are you actually doing?
So I'm actually here. Can you guys see me in the little picture on the side? Like I have this pen. Maybe if I hold, trying to see if I have a piece of paper. So if you see it, I just have a pen. It looks like a regular pen. So that's what I use to draw on the computer. And let's say if this is kind of like my screen, I just kind of draw on it like you would just draw on a piece of paper, and it kind of just works the same. It's a special screen that works with my pen, but if any of you guys have tried drawing on iPads before, it's kind of the same thing. Like if you've used your finger to like draw on an iPad, it's a little bit different than a mouse. It feels more like actual drawing.
And I'm gonna make one more sort of ask a cat for friend Tina. It's her birthday today.
Okay, I am gonna put the cat, I know there is a helmet, have this cat kind of riding in the back. Let's see.
He looks like a happy cat. And I don't know if it's a he cat. Is it a he cat or she cat? Doesn't matter.
Either or. It's a cat.
Yeah. Someone asked how you can make an airplane. Is there room for an airplane in the sky?
Yep. We can definitely add an airplane. So we'll do a little old style airplane. We'll have a little person.
what I am enjoying so much just watching is how you can put in all these different elements in one sheet of paper, and some are smaller, so the airplane looks like it's in the distance. Um, and some, you know, the fact that you transformed a sandcastle into a moving vehicle is just wonderful.
Thank you.
The ideas are endless, Kim. You could be here doing a turtle, balloons. Someone is asking how you become an illustrator, and how you get connected to authors. How did that work for you?
So for me, how I became an illustrator was that I love to draw a lot, and I practiced drawing a lot, and I went to art school to learn kind of how to draw better. So that's kind of how I became one. And then kind of how authors found me. So when an author writes a story, oftentimes it will go to the publisher, and they have someone there who will read the story, and they'll kind of think to themselves, what kind of illustrations will look best in this book? So I think we talked a little bit about before how there's different styles. So my style looks a certain way and somebody else's style might look different. So they think whose style will look best. And if they like my style, if they think my style fits the book the best, they'll email me with the story and they'll ask me if I want to work on the story. And then if I read it and I really love it and I'm really excited about the book, then I'll have a chance to work on it.
That's nice. And how many books would you like? Do you work on many books at a time? Could you, or is it more like one at a time? What would your preference be?
I like to work on a bunch of different things at once. Actually, right now I'm working on 4 different books,
Wow.
which is quite a few. They're all at different stages. So I don't start 4 books all at once, but I'm just finishing one right now. And then I'm just starting on a new one. And then a couple of them still just need to have some finishing touches put on them. So not in the thick of it, but yeah. And that's just the illustrations.
Wow. And so how long, let's say from start to finish, how long might a book take to make, to draw and to complete?
It can really depend. So some of my books, like if you have seen my Home Alone books or the Elf books, the Pop Classic series, which is based off of movies and TV shows, those are really quick. So they only take me about 4 or 5 months to finish the artwork for them. But something like Boxitects, where I'm doing like the story and the illustrations, that book took about 2 years from the time I had the idea to the time it was on bookshelves and libraries and stores.
Oh, that's so good to know. I mean, it really gives us a sense of how much work and time goes into a project like this, and you know, it's so exciting and so successful. Again, you have so many fans and they know very specific details about Boxitects. Someone asked, how do you draw hands like in the picture of Meg jumping out of the box? So there's lots. I would maybe recommend that they try to draw in the same way. Do you have any final thoughts or words to our audience who have been so generous with their time and ideas today?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for joining me today. And like, thanks so much for reading Boxitects. It's a super special book to me. And then I'd say if you just really love creating things and making things, keep creating and making those things and putting them out into the world, because I love seeing other people's creations.
Yeah, and so maybe Kim will spend some time looking at anything that comes up on our community gallery AGO Makes. We'd love to see your work, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kim, so much. What a great treat it's been today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Have a great day, everybody. Bye.
Bye.